Hi, I'm Jeff Cyphers with Sonoma Clean Power, and I'm here with Deb Emerson, our Managing Director of Power Procurement. And I want to talk a little about where community choice came from. It's a question we often get, and there's a story that actually goes back almost 3 decades to the mid-90s, where California was in the process of deregulating, opening up its power markets in order to try to provide some cost reductions for customers. And Governor Pete Wilson at the time passed a bill that really made the utilities sell off some of their power generation and invited some of the other private generators from around the U.S. to come into California.
Yeah, so these other merchant companies came in and bought up generation in order to create competition so that the prices would go lower and the consumers would be able to have lower electricity prices.
Yeah, and the idea was that customers could choose who their power provider was. And so I remember some of my neighbors bought Green Mountain Power because they wanted to buy more renewables. With that goal of lower costs, I'll cut to the chase, that it didn't work. And so I want to talk a little bit about why it didn't work and how that ultimately led to the formation of community choice power.
Yes, by the late 90s, some of these companies that had come in, they had learned how to manipulate the rules that were set forth in the California Independent System Operator, mostly legally, but it did drive up cost. One particular company we're aware of is Enron. They're often credited with trading strategies such as Death Star, Get Shorty, if you recall those. And there are other generators that would intentionally take off their power plants from the grid in an effort to drive up prices. So creating this false scarcity of resources that would make the prices higher for the overall portfolio that they owned.
And that's like where a power plant is down for maintenance, but somehow there were a lot of plants down for maintenance.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
There's recordings of generators telling their plant operators to go ahead and just keep that offline for a bit longer. We're getting $1,000 prices. So those are things that you shouldn't see in a functioning market. This coupled with kind of the perfect storm, we were in a drought. There was also a pipeline outage that was a major pipeline that got natural gas to California.
Right.
And at that time, if you remember, Jeff, most of our generation was gas supplied.
Oh, yeah.
And so the cost of natural gas is very important to the overall cost of electricity. So it's kind of this perfect storm, and it created blackouts in the state. And that was a really, pun intended, dark time for California.
Yeah, so the power was going out, it was staying out for a while, and then people were paying higher prices. And the utilities had a price cap, so they couldn't even recoup their wholesale costs in the system. So that led, ultimately, PG&E went bankrupt. And in fact, Southern California Edison got really close to bankruptcy, and the power exchange that California is using also went bankrupt. And the sum total of that was that taxpayers and ratepayers across California paid over $40 billion for those bailouts. And we ended up with a governor at the time, Gray Davis, going up for a recall. That was when Arnold Schwarzenegger came in, so governor lost his job. That's what happens when the power goes out. And so I wanted to highlight something that was a little bit of a bright spot. Lawmakers saw that the city of Los Angeles was essentially immune. They were protected from this, and that's because their power provider, LADWP, is a public provider that also owned its own transmission. So they were essentially kind of outside of this game. And because of that, lawmakers like Carol Migden at the time got the idea that a little more public oversight, a little more public power actually could lower the risks of this kind of catastrophe in the future. So in 2002, she passed Assembly Bill 117, creating community choice power providers in California. And it took a little while before the first one formed, but in 2010, 8 years later, we saw our neighbors to the south in Marin form a program and get it going, and it was very successful. So by 2014, we started our own here in Sonoma County, eventually expanding to Mendocino. And since then, we've seen really rapid growth. So we've seen 25 of our agencies around California since then, building a majority of the renewable energy for California. And it's been an exciting evolution. And we can't protect California from all the chaos that could happen in an energy market, but we do now have more public participation in energy markets and more transparency and oversight. So I think that experiment largely has worked when we corrected the original problems, but certainly don't want another energy crisis.
Yeah, I think just giving community a choice and more control over what are the power sources, what types of energy should your community be buying, and really giving them that input is important.
And the critical piece of that legislation was to put the public power provider as the default provider in a service territory. So customers can opt out. They can go back to companies like PG&E, the for-profit provider, but they start with the public provider. And that default status turned out to be the critical oversight function because it meant that most of the customers go through a public process with public oversight, and most of the power that's getting purchased is done in a public forum with full transparency. So some of what Community Choice brought to California was having a much better relationship with the local community. So what we're able to do is have meetings very close to our customers. We meet in Santa Rosa. That's only a few miles for most of our customers to reach us. We hold the meetings in plain language, which sounds like an odd thing to say, but if you go to the California Public Utilities Commission and you try to meet about larger utilities, you need to know all the lingo. It's incredibly dense, it's really complex, and most of the people at those meetings are attorneys or specially trained people. So we hold our meetings in plain language, and we are out in the community. So we're actually at the county fair and at the Realtors Association and meeting with retirees in HOAs. And that connection, that relationship really helps customers feel informed about what are our rates? What are we buying? Why are we doing something? And I think that kind of public relationship is something that we've brought to California.
And also, we answer to our community, not to shareholders that are putting money and investing into our company. Instead, our shareholders are our community.
Yeah, that's a good point.